Yeah, there's a few.
Well, good. All right. We'll call to order the Brainerd Safety and Public Works Committee meeting, December 19th, 2022, 6:30 PM in Brainerd City Council chambers. 5 items on the agenda tonight, first of which is adopting a resolution approving transit 2020 bus purchase. And Jesse Dean, if you want to take that one, go ahead.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. So the transit capital bus purchase, this is a bus that was actually ordered in 2020. Due to some supply chain issues, manufacturing issues that a lot of the car and auto manufacturers are seeing, that was delayed quite a bit. But we did get notification from the supplier on that one that they have acquired the chassis and they're ready to start building the bus, and likely deliver that to us in 2023. So at this point in the process, we need to approve a resolution through the council to authorize the purchase of that bus and continue through the next step of actual manufacturing of the bus and delivery. So included in the 2023 budget is approximately 10% of the cost that we received for the bid from North Central Bus. The other 90% is being covered through state and federal capital bus grants. It was discussed at the non-working funds about the budget issues that Transit's seeing currently, and it is staff's intention to continue to work through some operational efficiencies to correct some of those issues and continue to move it forward, including purchases of the bus this year as well as the one that was ordered in 2021, hopefully being delivered in 2024.
Excellent. You guys have any questions on it?
I mean, Jesse laid that out really clearly, but just to make sure everyone is aware, so City of Brainerd is paying 10% roughly of this purchase. The state pays the rest through the program we've got with the state.
Correct.
That dollar amount is roughly 10%.
And that 10% would come through user fees like fares.
Yep.
I'll just add too, I mean, it's so frustrating that this has taken so long, but that's, as you mentioned, that's the supply chain issues that we're dealing with. So there's a 2020 bus that we ordered, and likely have it towards the end of 2023. And just, it is the way it is, and we're gonna see it later on the council agenda too with P&F as that vehicle. Kind of the same situation, so.
Hard to get a vehicle. I had a question just about the revenue. You said the revenue covers this cost, roughly 11,000. How far beyond is the revenue at this point? Is it covering that and also paying our drivers and gas? The bus garage, is it covering everything at this point?
So as of right now, the budgeted revenue the budgeted revenue versus expenditures is, I can't remember the exact number, but it's some in the realm of like 50,000 short. So we're looking for some operational efficiencies that we can do shortly and more quickly, as well as continue to grow ridership to close some of that gap. And again, move us better into a much better position 2024 moving forward.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody have any more discussion? A motion?
Yeah. I'll motion to adopt the attached resolution authorizing the 2023 budgeted bus purchase for that 10% total of $11,755.50.
A second?
Definitely don't forget the 50 cents.
Not that 50 cents.
Motion and second. Any more discussion? Hearing none, go to a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Next item is a resolution for Surface Transportation Block Grant Program grant application. This is, I think, the third time we've discussed this one, but if you want to go explain why we have it on here again, Mr. Dean, go ahead.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. So this is just continuing the process of that application. At the November 7th meeting, the council approved staff to go ahead and apply for this grant for the local share of the 210 Washington Street reconstruction project coming up in a few years. As part of that grant application, staff would like to include a resolution from the council that would agree to maintain the facilities based on the agreement that we'll have with the DOT about which facilities it will be the cities to maintain. Typically, that kind of a resolution signals support from the local partners that they're willing to meet their obligations for the project moving forward after construction. Sometimes that can help strengthen the applications for those grants. So I would like to include this resolution that kind of helps affirm that commitment to the project from the council as part of that application packet.
Is there anything specific that we would be agreeing to with this moving forward in this resolution? Like what exactly are we agreeing to maintain that would be out of the ordinary?
So nothing out of the ordinary. Typically, at the moment we've maintained very little on the state highway. Some of the aesthetics pieces, if we would have plantings, pretty much anything that doesn't move people or traffic through there would be us. So street lighting, that's typically our maintenance. But other than that, very little. But it would be laid out in a cooperative agreement to be determined when we get closer to construction, once we have the scope of that project more defined with the final design.
And as far as the sidewalks, everybody's thinking about right now, like what we had last week, it looks like MnDOT came in and removed a lot of the berm on our sidewalk on South Sixth. Is that typically the way we treat it on all of 210?
MnDOT doesn't necessarily have to remove any snow off the sidewalk. They don't, they're not required to. Essentially, that falls onto the city to maintain sidewalks. However, we, especially when it comes to snow removal as part of our city code, require the adjacent properties to maintain the adjacent sidewalk next to their buildings. So kind of similar to what we do on some areas, we'll try and clean up some of those bigger berms when we can. I think MnDOT does the same thing when they are able to and we have the time.
The big thing that I'm thinking about is the bridge. So I think we're going to a 12-foot sidewalk on the bridge? It's a lot wider than it is right now.
Correct.
And we get complaints about how pedestrians can't get across the bridge during winter months because we fall behind on it. It turns to ice like it is right now, and then it's like that the rest of the winter. But if we have 10-foot sidewalks, that's gonna be even more. So do we have a plan for that? Is that part of this? Is it
No.
going to be specifically in this agreement or
In
this
the
grant?
cooperative agreement, it won't go probably into that detail. It'll say that we'll have to maintain the sidewalks, but that's about as much of the detail that it's gonna go into those cooperative agreements.
Okay.
So like in a snow event like today or last week, we will be responsible for clearing the snow off of there. The nice thing about the wider sidewalks is we can fit our smaller equipment through there, like the sweeper and the small blower through there. We can fit those through as with that additional width. We can't do that currently with the narrow walks that there is. The other nice part of that is they're proposing I'll call it a retaining wall, but a small barrier wall in between the lanes and the sidewalk, which should kind of keep some of that reduced a little bit. And with the additional width, that will allow us to keep a little bit more of a walkable path
Right.
kind of accessible through there too.
But as far as specifics, this resolution is just saying we're going to enter into that agreement. We're not hashing it out today.
Correct.
Okay.
Can I
Yeah, go ahead,
comment
Mr.
too?
Erickson.
That was kind of my understanding too. When we approved this, Jesse, to move forward with this grant, we were gonna maintain the aspects of the project that were our responsibility. I think this just simply formalizes that, so I'm ready, prepared with a motion
Go ahead.
to recommend adopting the attached resolution, agreeing to maintain the facilities as will be described in the cooperative agreement with MnDOT.
I second.
Go ahead and second that.
I do.
All right, we got a motion and a second. Any more discussion? Hearing none, go to a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Item number 3 is resolution for transportation alternatives grant application. This one's going through kind of along the same schedule. But Mr. Dean, if you want to explain this one too?
Yes, sir. Very similar to the other one. Actually, there's a second resolution along with this. So one is as a sponsoring agency. So essentially, we're going to take the grant funding and utilize them, and then obviously whatever local funds are required, we would supply those local funds. And then a very similar one that we would maintain the facilities after construction for the life of the project. The difference here between this and the previous one is these two are both required as part of the application process. So to continue with the application for the TA grants, we would need both of these resolutions included with that packet.
Okay.
I was just gonna comment further
Yep.
and just say, this does seem kind of silly that we're passing a resolution that we're the sponsor for an application of our own, but I've seen a lot of these from MnDOT, and they do this for a lot of the smaller communities that apply. If cities under 5,000, they need to get a sponsor from either the county, but being that we're over 5,000, we don't need that, we can be our own, so it's just kind of perfunctory in some ways, so.
Okay. And again, maintaining the facilities, again, we're just not hashing out details on that.
So this one would most likely be a lot of our costs. So we're talking about for this grant, specifically the pedestrian bridge over 210, and then the trail areas adjacent to 210 and then down 10th. Most of those will be our responsibility to maintain.
Already were.
Yep.
Yeah, already have been. Okay. Any more discussion? Got a motion?
Yeah. Yeah, motion to adopt the attached resolution agreeing to act as the sponsoring agency for the grant funding and to maintain the facilities receiving the grant funding.
Second.
Motion is second. Do we need two motions for two resolutions? City Administrator Bergman? We have two resolutions that are going to come up for the council meeting.
Yes.
One motion to enact both of those right now. Is that okay?
I think one right now, they'll have to be separate motions at full council.
Okay. All right, motion is second. Any more discussion? Hearing none, go to a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Next item, number 4 is the streetlight standards and details. This is the one we've been talking about the last couple meetings, having to do with the new streetlight standards that we enacted in March. Hopefully we can hammer out some of these details tonight and move forward with those going into spring projects. But Mr. Dean, if you want to go ahead and explain where we're at here.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. So obviously there was some discussion recently on updating for the progress of the new lighting standards and installations. So as part of that request, we started collecting some of the information that was discussed from fall 2021 through spring 2022. So in the attached memo, I included some of that information that the council directed on some of those items. Through some further discussions, it was determined that several more standards needed to be determined and approved by council prior to an order being placed for new lighting fixtures and poles. So included in the memo is kind of a summary of those items, including pole styles, heights, banners, outlets, fixture details such as color temperature, lighting direction, and then as well as some other items up for discussion. So as part of the packet, we had not yet received when the packet was sent out, we had not yet received additional details regarding the styles and the costs for the poles as indicated in the packet. But once we are able to determine those, we'll bring those back to the committee for some more review on those. Other than that, the poles styles specifically, summary of the items needing direction from the council is included at the end of the memo. So right now, staff is just requesting some discussion and direction on those recommendations.
Okay. So poles, for one, what is going to be on the poles as far as hanging banners, or if they're going to be wired for outlets? And what else do we need to hash out specifically?
That heights as well, kind of a standard height for poles. For poles specifically, standard style, but we'll figure that out when we get the response from the supplier. Again, like you mentioned, where do we outfit poles that can accommodate banners as well as outlets?
Right.
And then what's our standard height for poles?
I remember having this discussion, I don't know if you do, Mr. Erickson, but we were shopping both fixtures and poles at the same time, and it was the poles, if we went with decorative metal poles especially, that was where a lot of the cost was getting to the point where we're like, maybe we shouldn't do this. But we then figured out you could just switch the gray to a black pole and match the decorative,
Elements or?
yeah, the actual light, the fixture, and it was a lot more reasonable. So I don't think poles, I think we've already decided the poles. I don't know where that was lost in a meeting, and
Yeah.
I don't know what do you remember of that?
Yeah, no, just as you laid it out, I think the poles were where we were seeing a lot of the costs, and then we started looking at the different fixtures. Staff came back with several different options on the fixtures. I think we pretty much narrowed that down to what we're seeing here as far as the fixtures. But yeah, I think we talked about just changing the color of the poles and then making an option on the fixtures. I had a question on the height here. I don't know if it's maybe for James or Jesse, but the residential height there is listed there under the summary of recommendations is 15 feet. James, help me out. Why am I thinking 13? Our newly adopted residential code, don't we have 13? And why is it different from that?
So the newly adopted zoning code and the lighting ordinance, really, we took from all the work that went into, prior to the zoning code, our old one had lighting standards. We applied it to the new zoning code, and that recommendation was for 13 feet. You could increase a certain number of feet if it was shielded. However, the zoning code typically does not dictate right-of-way. It dictates what happens on someone's property. Including parks. So in my opinion, it would not dictate the right-of-way lighting.
Okay, so the difference basically private and public property.
Yep, exactly.
So outside of that, I don't think there's any reason to change where we have banner fixtures. I don't think there's really any reason that I know of to change where we have power outlets on any of these poles. I think the big question is downtown, but our downtown poles are already under kind of a different style. And this whole thing isn't meant to change anything with the decorative lighting downtown that's already there. I know in a previous meeting, we talked about that coming up in the near future. If the sidewalk gets dug up, do we want to add that? I don't even really know why we would want to add more than what we already have, because it sounds like we have a few areas where we have certain events plug into those already. Yeah,
If I may.
Trent, go ahead.
Got a quick microphone?
Yeah, and just name and,
Trent Hawkinson, Brainerd Public Utilities Electric Operations Manager. So there's a couple things that we have going on right now. Lighting is a monster in a whole. So depending when we look at heights, different pole heights of poles, it's going to give us different illumination on the ground. So what we really need to understand is what exactly are we trying to light at intersections, how much, and a lot of this is going to come into play is how far that pole set off the back of the curb, and the bug lighting or the different options that we have with the lights today. Lights have changed a lot over the last 10 years. If you look out here on Lower Street right now, those are all bulbs in there. They're LED bulbs, but they're not LED fixtures per se. We cannot retrofit those right now. We'd have to put an entire new fixture on top. So these are bulbs that you're seeing through here. When we get down to the downtown lighting area and some of the outlet concerns that we have is right now with the Christmas decorations. So we have to run temporary extension cords up to reefs and stuff like that to illuminate downtown. So I think what Jennifer was talking about earlier is if we do a sidewalk project downtown, what I would like to see is some conduits ran to the buildings, up the sides of the buildings, where we're actually attaching the schwags and stuff like that can be plugged directly in, so we're not running temporary extension cords. Extension cords are only good for 30 days, and they have to be unplugged and taken back down again. So those are some of the concerns that BPU has with the outlets and where we want them. I think that over the years, we've changed, different ideas have changed back and forth where we want reefs, lit reefs, not lit reefs, 210, South 6th, Laurel Street. Those are all things that I think if we can kind of narrow that down and identify those exact locations of where we want those to be, we can absolutely spec those poles to be with the correct outlets on those structures, I think is kind of where I need for direction. There's a cost to add those to each fixture, obviously, and depending on, we're looking at now at our poles, and the difference between poles that we put banners on and don't put banners on is the wind shear on that pole. So if you have two banners on it, that pole's gonna move a lot more. That pole has to be more structurally sound than what we're using on poles that don't have banners on them. So the BPU would like to see some consistency in our inventory. So we really don't want to have 8 different thicknesses of poles. We would love to say, okay, let's design a pole that can take banners, or, we can install banners on them that can handle the wind shear, and make that kind of our standard practice. So in the event that 10, 15 years down the road, we have a different idea that we want to put banners in spots that there aren't today, it's not a pole change. So at that point, we can just install those banners. These poles will get more expensive every year, so I think if we can install these initially with the correct structural integrity to have banners on them, system-wide, that kind of covers a lot of bases for us. There is a little more cost to that pole, but it's cheaper cost to do it now than it will be to do it later, if that makes sense.
So where we're at right now, we have, I think every single pole on South Sixth was fitted with banners for the 150th anniversary. I believe it was every single one. Sometimes cities will do every other on every other side. I'm okay with either, as long as they're bigger next time. But I think you stick with something that you can at least put a banner on for the main thoroughfare 25-foot poles.
I'm not sure if you've seen it. There is a banner policy that the BPU had put together that has not been blessed yet. I think it's still in the review process. This goes back a ways too. But so when we design these banners, you're exactly correct on the size of them. So if we're doing something that is 42 by 24, it's different than 60 inches by 28 inches as far as that structural integrity of that pole. So those will all come into calculations when we talk to the pole manufacturers. If we can get this nailed down and say, okay, our banners will be this size, we give those measurements to the pole manufacturers, and they're able to spec those out to exactly what we need, and there's no guessing going forward on which poles are where.
And I'm trying to think of the size for what downtown has, or if they're any different than what we have on Laurel Street down here. I think those are all the same, aren't they?
No, we have several different size banners through the system right now.
Okay.
There's banners that go up and down College Drive. The school district has banners. There's a lot of banners on a lot of poles right now. I think, I don't have an exact number, but there's a significant number of banners on poles right now.
Well, not the ones we use for the 150.
No.
Correct.
No,
Think a
if
little
we,
bit
if
bigger.
we want a good example,
Yeah,
what
you
college,
couldn't really read
what
those.
CLC has done is,
I think
They about know.
CLC is the one that I think is what stands out to me as being the right size.
yep.
So I would start there. I don't know, what's the plan? Are we gonna try to come back next meeting with more of a pricing standard and rewrite or revise this policy with the rest of the details in? Is that our plan, or?
Correct. So once we determine all these details, we'll have a formal final policy, including the determined standards. So the pole standards, the style, the fixture standards, and the style. Maybe even I don't know, call it a cut sheet in there, but very specifically lay those out in the lighting policy, not only for us, but for developers doing a new residential development, that they know what our expectation is when they develop a new plot of land. So all of that would be in a final policy to be reviewed by the committee and council, including, like I mentioned, the pole styles and costs once we get those from the supplier as well. The only thing I think I missed from there is outlets. So was the discussion on outlets and power and banners on all the commercial corridor poles, is that correct?
I would not lean towards putting outlets on every one, just based on cost. If you want to show us what the cost difference would be, that might be, if it's not that big of a difference, then maybe we go with it. But I think just keeping things consistent with what they are, just changing out the style and getting the banners up to size. I think if there's an outlet on the pole, replace the outlet on that pole if you can. If there's not, leave it as is. I don't think we would need to light up every single wreath down the street for a month every year. I'm not the only one making that decision, but that's just my position on it.
So you mentioned the extension cords. So where are you using those now? All throughout downtown, and then where else?
Basically just in downtown right now. The other poles that have wreaths on them on South Sixth there already have outlets installed on them. We installed, the BPU came back and installed those after those poles were already set. It's probably going to be, I would estimate, $300 or less to add a pole from the to add outlets from the manufacturer. So they'd ship to us with pole outlets already there. We can come back and add them after the fact, but sometimes circuitry, and depending on what we have going on in the streetlight circuit right there, it's not always a huge win for the BPU to try to do that. We can always accommodate it, but it's more cost sometimes to come back and do it after the fact, where if we can do it ahead of time, or if you just say, we have this particular certain amount of blocks that we want lighting on them, excellent, we can, we can set
Right.
those up and have those that way. But it's kind of been, there's outlets on 210 Washington Street. There's quite a few outlets on poles right now. I think the reason you don't see as many lit up reefs right now is because a lot of the reefs are failing because they need to be replaced. And that's something that needs to be addressed. Also, that some of these have been in service for a lot of years, and it's time to look at updating them. A lot of them are incandescent bulbs. There's not a lot of LED stuff out there right now, so we can make big strides in energy conservation with going to LED lighting and some stuff like that that we currently don't have on all of them right now.
Okay. Well, definitely the way we want to go. Go ahead. if you have a
Well, I
question.
agree. I think we should at least see the cost of outlets on all the poles, then you can make a determination of, okay, outlets on these poles, but not these ones.
I wonder if it would
least get
even
the
be
cost.
worth basically having a map, identifying where all of the outletted poles are, if we're gonna have discussions about, what do we want as kind of a unifying
Right.
standard? It would be worth knowing, well, what do we have as an inventory already?
Right. Do we have them clustered already? Do we have them scattered throughout?
Right. Is it total piecemeal?
What is the overall
Was-
percentage?
Was there big thought put into it ahead of time
Right.
at a certain point?
You gotta imagine there's a cost to the extension cords too, if you're going through those every 30 days.
Yeah, so, the 30 days is all along, extension cord can only be used for temporary use. For 30 days, it has to be inspected, unplugged, inspected, and it can be reinstalled again. But BPU, on average, every 2 to 3 years, depending on what the weather is, we're replacing those cords. And we're buying industrial, outdoor use cords. It's just they're swinging in the wind, and they're
It sounds to me like that's not a light pole issue.
correct. It is not. That was be more of a sidewalk project downtown. At that point, we would absolutely want to install the conduits to get those receptacles in the correct locations at that point. So I would agree, it's not maybe a topic for this one, but definitely a topic for lighting in general for downtown.
Okay. As far as the temperature lighting, that's going back to, Mr. Granvik, do you want to talk about that?
Yes, I can expand on that. So with our zoning code update and the lighting that the city has already reviewed, Planning Commission looked at color temperature standards, kind of one of the last things to put into the zoning code. So we did have a workshop on November 16th regarding potentially changing the zoning code for color temperature standards and lighting. At that workshop, it was discussed that it may be beneficial to create a citywide work group, because there's a lot of entities that go into how our performance lights end up turning out. So it's essentially the zoning code with planning commission on private properties. The park board certainly has interest in their parks on what the color temperature standards would be, as well as Brainerd Public Utilities and the engineering department on what the streetlights would be. So the planning commission did task myself with attending the different commissions to see if they were interested in forming this work group. All parties did seem interested to form this work group. I am going to be going to each commission this week to potentially select one member from each commission to work on this work group. I know we talked about the potential of having some type of recommendation or decision come out of here for the street lighting policy to potentially then be brought as a final policy for the second meeting in January. I think, we could certainly do this work group meeting at the beginning of January and then have that kind of recommendation from there. And then after that, the park board and planning commission would work on codifying it into the zoning code.
So you're looking for a recommendation from this group as well?
So as of right now, just to clarify, I think we want to just see if the council is willing to explore the 3,000 Kelvin option. If not, that kind of changes some of this conversation, but if you're willing to explore that, we would continue down the road of the work group to bring more of a formal recommendation. But as of right now, we're looking for more of just kind of a general consensus that we should continue to explore the different
Yeah.
options.
I definitely lean towards the warmer lighting in anywhere. I mean, at my house and wherever. I really don't like the cooler and the blue lighting. When I look at 3,000 on this one though, it doesn't really look that much different. It looks better than the 4,000, which is somewhat more standard, I guess, but when you get down to 2,700, that's where it looks better to me. I know you get into some safety issues in certain areas, but, as far as residential lighting, what's shining in your window at night, I think 2,700 would be even better than the 3,000. I don't know what that does to cost. It's probably even less.
It's actually goes the other direction. So it takes more wattage to illuminate the same amount of area at a 27 K color frame than it does for the 4,000. So 4,000 can be a little more of an industry standard, so we get better price points because there's scales be quantity, more of those are made, more of those are bought. When we look at these pictures right here, the one that to my left on the screen would be a 4,000 K light. The one to the right is actually not even an LED light. That's an HPS bulb. It's a high pressure sodium bulb. So that is the traditional yellow stuff that we've all seen and grew up with through our entire lives. That's a standard that's been, I would say, around for the last 15 years. Previous to that, you were in mercury vapor bulbs. So lamping and lighting, and that's where I'm kind of coming from our perspective. It's came a long ways. There's a ton of science behind lighting in itself, and I think if we just get some good direction on which way we want to go with the colors. I don't think BPU in itself has any skin in the game of which one we choose, but the wattages will get higher at the more yellow light or warmer light you get, which in turn will affect the bill for the city for the consumption of the electricity for the lighting.
Mr. Chair?
Yep. Go ahead.
I certainly support it. I know somewhere in that range of the 3,000. I kind of like that a little bit neutral, but I do like the warm. But I like toning it down a little bit. And I remember at the discussion we had at the planning commission, and I think part of this was, and maybe James, you alluded to it, but what's the standard? What do we require of residential homes? Is it that 3,000?
We really don't have any standards right now in our zoning code. It really just talks about light trespass onto other properties.
Okay.
So yeah, we're looking to set that standard in the zoning code now.
Okay, so, because I think that was one of the things we talked about is, if the city is gonna start to require that, kind of a light trespass of our residents, that we need to be looking at our own, city lights and making sure that we're, keeping those, not having it too bright. And you talked about the trespass as well as far as how we're wanting to light the intersection.
Correct, yeah. So we have different, like I said, LEDs have came a long ways. There's different drivers now that we put in these lights, and we can stretch this light out long. We can stretch it out in any direction. We can make it very sharp. There's a lot of different lenses we can do. I think we can definitely come back with some suggestions of what we would suggest and kind of show you some different options that are out there. The cost isn't going to change too much in the drivers themselves as far as which way we want to stretch the lights. So we can do an 80-20, where 80% of the lights shining forward, only 20% of the lights shining back. If you really want to be a nerd in LEDs, there's a bug rating in LEDs. That's going to be backlight, uplight, and ground light. And that's going to be where those lenses and where that light's shining to. So, there is a definite science to this. And we have vendors that will be more than happy to sit down and do these projects with us. So if we could pick some of these exact products we want, we can help design what that'll look like, and we could bring back some visual presentations for you guys from our vendors once we kind of have a good idea. I would say that I don't know that I'm 100% certain on what fixtures we've chosen. I know we've chosen the Breckenridge light that's going to replace these, which is pretty much apples to apples what we have out in the field now, other than this will be an LED driver, where most of ours that are installed right now are still bulbs. There is quite a few LEDs going up, but there's still primarily bulbs on this style of residential lighting right now in the BPU system.
I guess I thought we were pretty firm on what we had chosen, so I don't know what, there was obviously a miscommunication somewhere between either our city engineer or with BPU. I'm not really sure what that was, but I don't know what else. From being a councilman, going through this, and having all kinds of different choices that we looked at, and we compared pricing, and then we finally got to polls, and we both remember this, and I'm not gonna dig through it to find it. But we chose a pretty specific fixture,
Find it up here.
and I don't,
Brent, I think it might be the other way.
It should be in that
I don't
memo
know where
too.
that
The
message didn't get
Epic and the
passed
Breckenridge were the two fixtures, I believe, that they were approved.
Well, it was even a specific
Stop
vendor.
right there for me, if you could go back down. This is where my confusion comes into play right here. We have 5 different things circled on there.
You want to scroll a
I don't know
little?
why that's even
Right there.
in this, because this was chosen, and it was, yeah, there was number 1, number 2, number 3. We sat here as 7 council members and the mayor and administrator, and we chose specifically, well, we chose the one out on the far right, which is really blurry in this picture. We chose, I believe, the one number 3. And there were better pictures of those examples than these right here. So where that confusion came in, I have no idea. Because I thought
Correct.
we were
So-
good to go. I think the whole council thought we were good to go on that, and then
The
the question
information-
came up about 1 month later, what's going on with those lights, and then here we are again. So we probably should have taken care of this a lot smoother about 9 months ago. But again,
I can tell you where I think the disconnect came. We had some staff changeover. Mr. Sandy left the city. He was really spearheading this for the city. What BPU did for this project was we set them up with our vendors and the lighting specialists and said, hey, there's 1,000 different options. Here you go. Here's with the vendors. You guys sit down, choose what you'd like to go with, and then just let us know, and we'll get pricing from there. And then that BPU never really got anything back from anybody after that. Is kind of where, nothing crossed my desk.
it's crazy.
So,
It's a huge change to just forget about for 9 months. I don't know. I don't know how that happens. Hopefully it doesn't happen anymore.
so to jump back, and I know it was brought up by Trent as well as you referring to kind of the light throwing. We're looking for kind of some direction to even, like with the light throwing, the 100% out to the street or the 80-20 to the street and then 20% going back.
I like the 80-20, but I think there's gonna be different areas where you're gonna wanna see some changes that are a little bit different on T intersections or whatever. I know of a specific example of a neighbor of mine that had city, I don't know if it was BPU that came in and blacked out one of the sides because it's shining right in their picture window. You know, and I think about the one in front of my house that I'd like to do that sometimes too, but
So the 80-20, the intention is that the 20 is going to allow for a little bit of illumination for maybe a storefront if you're in like a business area or a little bit on the sidewalk. It would not most likely travel into a home. Like you see right now, there's really no restriction on the lighting at all. It's kind of everywhere evenly, so you could almost consider it 50-50. The nice thing is you can control that quite a bit, and then by aiming it, you can control it even further during installation. So the one concern I have with a handful of different ones is kind of what Trent mentioned, is having several different types of fixtures out in the stockpile of which ones are 100, which ones are 80-20. By having like a standard of an 80-20, it's a fixture that can actually work pretty well in just about all the settings. Even if there isn't a sidewalk, the illumination is not going to be so great that it's going to be getting into somebody's house intrusively. Kind of like the lighting that is out there today without any kind of restriction. So that's kind of where that recommendation of 80-20 came from, but we're absolutely open to more discussion on it.
Mr. Erickson.
You know, from planning commission, and you know, your background and from your research, you might have a good sense of what that 80-20 is, but do you think some visual examples might be helpful? So maybe have staff come back with, you talked about all the different configurations.
BPU would love to put something together for you on that and bring back some examples, absolutely.
That might be helpful.
Just for clarification
I'm
for me.
glad you said that, because even, you pointed at me and, with my background. The only thing running through my head was, man, it'd be great to see some diagrams and some illustrations, because, 80-20 doesn't always mean what you think it means, just to pull up a.
Just for my clarification, the pole up here on the very right, that's the other fixture you chose? The pole, I should say. The fixture, I think, is on the end of that pole, or was it number 5 below number 3 that was? And there's a reason that I asked the question, so before I won't go down the rabbit hole unless there's clarification needed.
No, not number 5. I think number 5 was a better example of what we already have on some of the boulevards, like College Drive.
Yep.
And some of the other roundabout areas. But
Colorized photo.
The colorized photo is the one that,
Thank you.
the fixture, not the pole. The pole, I think that's a more decorative pole. I'm sure you can tell because it's high definition.
So
But,
one of the things that I can, just between number 5 and the one to the right there, I think it's number 1 on top, but the colored one for number 5 is the mast arm that you see. So when we talk about lighting direction and what we're gonna light, sometimes depending on where that pole is set, we need to have a longer mast arm to come out and to reach out farther. So if we have spots where we can't set the poles, 3 feet behind the curb and we're back 5 or 6 feet because there's a sidewalk or something that impedes us from doing that, we have to install longer mast arms. So that's kind of where Jesse's going with the 80-20 thing. We'll get it to where it needs to be at the curb line so the lights are correct, but we may have to have different size mast arms, which we do today right now. It's pretty standard. If you drive down, even Laurel Street down here, you're gonna see a lot of wood poles with these longer lights on them, and that's another question I have. Are we looking at changing out lights where BPU has distribution infrastructure, where we have a wood pole that we already have a light mounted to that pole currently? And are we looking at maybe changing that and putting a fiberglass pole on the other side of the road to light that intersection? Or would we
Right,
like to stay where we're at right now?
I read that, and I'm wondering, is this like city property, or we're talking about a back lot somewhere? Or are we talking about right on the main?
This is right on the main drag, so I would, I think it's a very good example right here on Laurel Street. If you come out of City Hall here and you take a right and head west, as you come around the corner and get past Northwest 4th, you'll start to see where our primary pole line is on the south side of Laurel Street right there.
Sure.
And all of those lights are security light LED lights, and they shine those intersections very well. You'll notice those are very long mast arms to get out over those intersections because those poles are set farther back. We can't really install poles we don't want to install poles underneath our distribution feeders, so if we want to kind of get rid, if you don't like that look, we would have to install a fiberglass pole on the other side of the road, which can be done, but that's going to be more, it's not going to be as cost effective as how we're lighting these intersections currently. So is it aesthetics, or are we trying to?
Oh, it's totally aesthetics, but I don't think we're going into just changing everything right away. The idea was to do these as we're doing streets projects from now on going forward, instead of putting the old ugly gray ones up. As we do a street, bring in the new lights. The main corridors, that's different. There was already a motion on that one too, and it sounds like it was too late to order some of these lights, and we were not on the same page, obviously, so. But going forward, when we do, obviously 210, there's a lot of aesthetics that are gonna go into that, not just lighting, but that's a big part of it. We've talked Oak Street, we've talked South Sixth, we've talked Mill Avenue, but like these ones that you're talking about, it's not something that I would jump on right away and make sure we change it. That's, when that street gets redone, then we change it.
Okay, because that pole line wouldn't be affected by a street project. So I guess the question would be, when you're talking resurfacing or pipe or what, I just need some clarification on when this.
Anytime I think we resurface a street.
Okay.
That just distributes the time that we put into it, I think, per summer. But I'm just one member here. That's
Yep.
kind of the way I'd picture
And
it.
I appreciate the clarification.
Yep, so that's kind of in the same boat. As we're even doing the reconstruction projects, if there's an existing wooden pole, do we want to install a second actual light pole for the aesthetics version, or do you just install the security light? And you're obviously saving a considerable amount of cost because you're not installing another feed, another pole. So there's a lot of cost savings by illuminating off the existing wood pole. So when those reconstruction projects come up, do we split that light off into its own installation? And on the same effect, when there isn't a light at an intersection and it gets requested, is the direction to install a new pole, or is the direction to install a new light on the existing wood pole, if one exists there? So that's kind of the direction we were really pushing for, is in those situations where you have that wood pole, how do you want them handled?
I think you replace the wood pole,
Okay.
especially if it's anywhere on a public street.
Okay,
So if it's something in a back parking lot of the streets garage or BPU or something like that, which we wouldn't have any say over that anyway. But if it's on a public street, no matter what intersection, if we're redoing that intersection, I would say we do replace that.
Gotcha.
okay.
So the last couple things in the memo were a couple kind of miscellaneous things. So ordering guidelines, I mentioned in there kind of economy of scale and how ordering can help accelerate the timeline of when these get delivered, as well as pricing, especially with freight, when we're talking about larger orders and you're paying a chunk of freight anyway. So talking with Trent, we were feeling like the initial order to just make sure that we had enough to make a kind of financial sense and using those economics of scale. We were thinking for, at least for the new commercial standard, kind of ordering all the commercial corridors, everything except for South Sixth, which was just recently installed. And then for the residential standard, the upcoming two reconstruction projects that we have on our capital improvement plan. So we got North Brainerd next year and then South Brainerd the following year. I think we were talking a couple dozen for the residential standard. We felt like that would be enough poles to kind of help accelerate that process with the supplier to make sure that we were getting the most bang for our buck for those.
A couple dozen residential is all we would need?
Correct.
Really?
I think that another clarification that I would like to see is the salt and pepper, what I call it. So if a pole gets hit up in northeast Brainerd tonight because it's icy and snowy out, and we have the new black style poles, BPU would prefer to have one color, one inventory of that pole. We would just take those poles onesies, twosies as they get hit by cars or damaged from storms. So you might see some of them going in. So we would, when Jesse's talking about project specifically, that's all that's in your project corridor for north side. That's all the poles that it's affecting inside of your scope of work.
Yep, and that makes sense to me.
Okay.
If you still have inventory of a pole that fell, which
We'll
fell
use them
on
up.
South Sixth right now. Saw it the other day. And we still have some of those, use those up until the street has been redone.
Excellent.
And then our intention was, after that initial order, just kind of looking at our capital improvement plan and essentially ordering about 5 years out. So all of the next 5 years worth of projects, we would order all those in one kind of lump sum, again, to take advantage of that economy of scale.
And just to be clear, that cost gets distributed down, a 20 or 30-year cycle, no matter what we do. It's a better price now than it will likely be 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now.
Absolutely.
Okay. Anything else you want direction on, or is this?
I think I got enough to do some damage and come back with you with some visual stuff.
Okay. Jesse, any more questions there?
I think we got enough on there, yep.
All right,
All right, thank you.
you bet. Thank you. We'll move on to our last item. Approve a street light request. Go ahead, Mr. Dean.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. So a resident has submitted a request for a street light at the intersection of Viking Street and Wild Avenue up in Northtown. Included in the packet is the application. It does not have existing lighting at that intersection. There are some concerns about security out there, which would probably be better served through the security light agreement with BPU. However, with the lack of lighting at the intersection, we do feel that there is a safety concern with the potential for crossing traffic entering. Although it is a quieter intersection, it will continue to build more traffic as more homes are built in there. So based on the guidance from the streetlight policy that was discussed last spring, staff would consider this kind of as an existing subdivision that predates the policy. So due to that, we could see that as more of an improvement to the safety of the intersection rather than treating it as a new development the developer would be responsible for. So at this time, we're just recommending that we would install a streetlight at the intersection at the city's expense.
Could we see where the closest streetlights are on a map? That would be a lot more helpful than,
Roughly about a block and a half to the north on Northtown and Viking.
so in feet, those blocks are what, 300-foot blocks?
It would be about 400, 450 feet away.
What's our standard?
I believe it's 380.
Maximum?
380 is the spacing. I believe that was in the policy.
Okay. I mean, so it makes sense to me. Any questions, discussion on it?
No, ready with the motion to recommend installation of a streetlight at the intersection of Viking Street and Wild Avenue at the city's expense.
And I so second.
Motion and a second. Any more discussion? Hearing none, go to a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Adjourn to the regular meeting.